On January 13, 2026, the United States Supreme Court heard oral arguments in two cases that could fundamentally change the landscape of youth sports in America. The cases, Little Vida, Hecox from Idaho and West Virginia versus B.P.J., bring the national debate over whether transgender girls and women should be eligible to compete in girls and women's sports to the country's highest court. While the immediate focus is on two young athletes, an estimated 122,000 transgender youth could be participating in high school level team athletics nationwide, making this one of the most consequential civil rights cases of our generation. The first case involves Lindsay Hecox, who challenged Idaho's Fairness in Women's Sports Act after she was prevented from joining the women's cross-country team at Boise State University. Idaho's law, signed in March 2020, barred transgender girls and women from girls' and women's school and college sports, making it the first state law of its kind. The second case centers on Becky Jackson, now a 15-year-old high school student in West Virginia. Her mother, Heather Jackson, sued in response to the Save Women's Sports Act, a 2021 law banning transgender women and girls from competing on women's and girls' teams in public secondary schools and colleges. These aren't just legal abstractions. Becky loves being part of a team and wanted to participate in cross-country and track and field with her friends. She has received medication from the onset of puberty and has never experienced any physiological changes associated with puberty for boys. As a result of an injunction issued by the lower courts, she has been able to participate in middle school cross-country and track and field for the past 3 years. How many athletes are we really talking about? The numbers tell a complex story. To date, 27 states have enacted laws barring transgender participation in sports. But how many transgender athletes actually exist in America's schools? At the high school level, one study using data from the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System found that 40.7% of transgender youth grades 9 to 12 played on at least one sports team. Applying that estimate to the population of transgender youth aged 13-17 suggests that as many as 122,000 transgender youth could be participating in high school level team athletics. However, the actual number of transgender girls competing on girls' teams, the specific focus of these state bans, appears to be much smaller. In May 2023, the American Civil Liberties Union told Newsweek that Save Women's Sports, a leading voice in the bid to ban transgender athletes from competing in girls' sports, identified only 5 transgender athletes competing on girls' teams in school sports for grades K through 12. At the college level, researcher and medical physicist Joanna Harper told Newsweek that while we don't know the exact number of trans women competing in NCAA sports, she would be very surprised if there were more than 100 of them in the women's category. This disparity between the estimated 122,000 transgender youth participating in sports overall and the handful competing on teams aligned with their gender identity reveals a crucial reality. Most transgender youth either compete on teams matching their sex assigned at birth, don't participate in sports at all, or face barriers to participation. What happened in the Supreme Court? After nearly 3.5 hours of arguments, a majority of the justices appeared to agree with the states that the laws can remain in place, even if it was not clear how broadly their ruling might sweep. Idaho Solicitor General Alan Hurst told the justices that Idaho's law classifies on the basis of sex because sex is what matters in sports, as it correlates strongly with countless athletic advantages like size, muscle mass, bone mass, and heart and lung capacity. The state argued its purpose was to preserve equal opportunities for women and girls in sports. The justices grappled with fundamental questions about fairness, discrimination, and constitutional protection. Chief Justice John Roberts suggested that the logic of the 2020 Bostock v. Clayton County precedent, which protects gay and transgender employees from discrimination, doesn't apply to the sports cases. The 2020 decision had been central to the transgender athletes' legal argument. Conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh appeared eager for the court to avoid a ruling that would hinder the 23 states that allow transgender athletes to participate in girls' and women's sports. Kavanaugh, a sports fanatic who has long coached girls' basketball teams, said he hates that a kid who wants to play sports might not be able to play sports, but observed it's kind of a zero-sum game for a lot of teams. Justice Sonia Sotomayor said that with an estimated 2.8 million people in the U.S. who identify as transgender, their rights should be respected, even if they represent a relatively small percentage of the population, noting that the numbers don't talk about the human beings. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson asked about someone who is transgender but who does not have, because of medical interventions, the same threat to physical competition and safety that the state puts forward as justification for the ban. Why shouldn't that person be able to bring a challenge to the law as it applies to her? The cases present 2 fundamental constitutional questions. First, Title IX. Justices will decide whether restrictions on transgender sports participation violate the prohibition on sex discrimination in education programs under Title IX. Title IX was passed by Congress in 1972 and bars sex-based discrimination in schools receiving federal funds, including in school-sponsored programs and activities. The law is widely credited with creating and expanding girls' and women's sports programs. Second, equal protection. The court will consider whether these bans violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Hecox argues that Idaho's law violates the Equal Protection Clause because it rests on overbroad generalizations about the sexes. Hecox contends that the prohibition violates equal protection by discriminating against a quasi-suspect classification of transgender people. Idaho rejects these arguments. The state argues that nothing in the Equal Protection Clause requires Idaho to treat males who identify as women as if they were female in sports or elsewhere. Why this matters beyond sports? While the cases focus specifically on sports participation, the implications extend far beyond the playing field. Sports teams provide teammates many benefits beyond sports itself, including leadership, teamwork, confidence, and health. Denying a student the ability to participate is not only discriminatory but harmful to a student's self-esteem, sending a message that they are not good enough and deserve to be excluded. The Supreme Court's decision could also establish precedents that affect other areas of transgender rights. Justices mentioned they have a lot of issues coming down the pike involving locker rooms, bathrooms, passport policies, and transgender military members. How they rule on the sports cases could signal their approach to these other contested areas. There's also evidence that sports bans have unintended consequences beyond their stated targets. Athletes of all ages and abilities who are not trans have been bullied and harassed when accused of being trans. A college volleyball team in California had to get security to protect teams when one player was accused of being transgender, and a high school player in Utah, falsely accused of being transgender, had to get police protection. The political landscape. This case arrives in a highly charged political environment. President Trump has made opposition to transgender rights a cornerstone of his administration. Trump, an outspoken opponent of transgender rights, issued an executive order soon after taking office last year titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports, and his administration has sided with the states in the Supreme Court case. Polling shows that 69% of U.S. adults believe that transgender athletes should only be allowed to play on sports teams that match their birth sex, while 66% of Americans say a person's birth sex, rather than gender identity, should be listed on government documents. When the sports question was first asked in 2021, support for transgender athletes being able to play on teams matching their current gender identity was 10 percentage points higher than it is now, at 34%. The political divide is stark. About 9 in 10 Republicans support these policies, but only about 4 in 10 Democrats do. While independents' views are similar to the national averages, what happens next? A decision is expected in spring or early summer of 2026. The justices appear likely to uphold these laws, but really not decide much else, potentially deciding this on very narrow grounds and kicking other issues down the road to deal with another time. The court's 3 Democratic appointees appeared to recognize that the challengers faced an uphill battle and seemed to devote much of their efforts to mitigating their losses, either by getting one case thrown out or by limiting the court's decision to a narrow one. One complicating factor? Lindsay, Hecox filed a motion to withdraw from the case, citing her wariness of the negative attention, and promising not to pursue playing any sport sponsored by Boise State while she remains a student. The court said it would rule on that question following oral arguments. If the court declares her case moot, it could limit the precedential impact of the ruling. Behind all the constitutional analysis and political rhetoric are real young people trying to navigate their identities while participating in activities they love. Becky simply wants to be with her teammates on the track and field team, to experience the camaraderie and many documented benefits of participating in team sports. The stakes are profoundly personal for the estimated 122,000 transgender youth who participate in high school sports. Whether they'll be able to continue playing with their peers or be forced to choose between their identity and their team hangs in the balance. This is more than a legal case. It's about dignity, belonging, and the fundamental American promise of equal treatment under law. As the nation awaits the Supreme Court's decision in the coming months, transgender youth across America are watching, waiting, and wondering if the highest court in the land will affirm their right to simply be part of the team.